I right now am just very content where I'm at because kind of like Paul, I've seen good times, I've seen bad times, and through it all, I have Christ. Now, I do feel like the people that don't have Christ, they are really to be pitied because they're basically trying to fill that emptiness in their hearts with the wrong thing. It will never work. It will always not satisfy in the end, and they'll just live a life of unfulfilled potential.
All right, welcome everyone to the Uncommon Human podcast. Today, we've got a special guest, Dr. Howell, and what a background he has. Graduated from Stanford University, one of the top designers in the country, and I'll let him explain a lot about his journey along that way, but holds a dear heart with me in the tennis world, right? He's a tennis instructor. He's in the pickleball world as well, and he's a Christian, godly man. He's a pastor. Wow, he's got all kinds of top things here on his resume. But Dr. Howell, welcome.
Thank you, Derek. So good to be with you.
Good to have you. Good to have you. So, Hal, we've known each other how long now? Not too long, right?
Yeah, maybe about 6 months. I knew of you, but we didn't really connect until the TP USA Faith thing in Phoenix, which is 6 months ago. You sat next to me and my wife, and you ate like a maniac, and my wife was like so impressed.
Yeah, don't tell my wife that. She'd be like, what do you mean? Someone got impressed that you ate fast? Because she's always telling me, I can't take you to any dinner place that's fancy because you eat like a animal, right? And I'm gonna say, you know what? There's people that love my eating.
That's right. That's right.
It's okay to take it out of context a little bit, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
it was all healthy food. It was all healthy food.
It's all healthy food. Yes, right. Absolutely. So I want to start out, Hal, just share a little bit of kind of like upbringing, where you're from, where you're born, kind of like if we can kind of glide through that into where you're at today, and then we'll dive into a couple of things that I want to chat with you about.
All right. Yeah, sounds good. So actually, I started out life in Minneapolis, Minnesota. That's where I was born.
Okay.
The reason why a Chinese guy ended up in Minnesota is because my dad actually came to America on a scholarship. He was one of those scholars that, you take this big test in China and like only the top 10% get like sent to America to learn. So because of his scores, he actually got into MIT, and he did get into this place called Stanford, but he never heard of it before, so he just opted to go to MIT. So,
wow.
I can imagine my life is completely different. Yeah, go ahead.
So he actually came into America legally.
Yes, he was an actual legal immigrant. That is correct.
Wow.
That is correct.
What a fight. I mean, believe it or not, people had a fight to get to America back then, right?
Oh yeah. No, it was a big deal. It was a big deal because when he came, his English was not very good or anything. And he did his 2 years at MIT, got his master's. Unfortunately, that was exactly when the communists took over China. So his parents, who by the way became Christians during Hudson Taylor's missionary efforts, so he was a Christian when he came to America already.
Wow.
So his parents basically said, "Stay in America, don't come back. It's not going well here."
Wow.
So that's what happened. So my dad was like, "Oh, okay, now what do I do?" And he was a civil engineer. He specialized in hydrodynamics, like building dams and stuff like that. Because his goal was to go back to China and solve the problem of the flooding of the Yangtze River. Because that happens every year, and it creates untold amounts of damage and everything like that. So that's what he felt his calling was. But now that door was shut, it's like, oh, what do I do now? And so he ended up just following his favorite professor, which is a guy that was based in at the University of Minnesota. So that's how we ended up in Minnesota, because he moved to Minnesota. And then what happened was while he was there, he met some folks, and one of them was a friend of.
You're on mute.
Started out in the mainland in Hunan.
Okay.
That's from for anybody who's keeping track. But because of the communist takeover, her family, her dad was actually a general in Chiang Kai-shek's army. So they had to flee. So she ended up going to Taiwan. So in Taiwan, she and this woman were friends. And then she ended up, the friend ended up in University of Minnesota and got to know my dad and basically said, hey, there's this really nice girl in Taiwan. You should probably, get to know her. And so they started to correspond, like pen pals, so there's back and forth. And they did this for about 3 or 4 years. And then afterwards, basically my mom, she graduated from, a pretty prestigious university in Taiwan. So she ended up deciding to get her master's degree in English at the University of Minnesota.
Wow.
So, very convenient, right? So,
yes.
She ended up with the not with an MA, but with an MRS, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
So,
wow.
So that's how our family ended up in Minnesota. And then, I'm the firstborn. I was, born at Mount Sinai Hospital in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And as I grew up, it's very interesting because my mom basically had her mom, so my grandma, come and help her raise me. So basically, until I was 4 or 5, all I heard was the Hunanese dialect of their village. So that's what I spoke. I didn't actually speak English at all, when I was 4 or 5.
Wow.
And then as it turned out, my parents, at that point, they got pregnant again, and then my younger brother was born, and they decided it was time for an actual honeymoon because they didn't really have one the first time around. So they flew us all to Taiwan, and then dropped us off at my grandfather's house. So I actually ended up going to school in Taiwan for about 3 or 4 months because they did an extended tour of Asia and left us, with the grandparents.
Wow.
So it was very interesting,
what a honeymoon. That's a great.
That's a big deal for them, man. I have this absolutely. But so I ended up going to school and learning like 3,000 characters, and I was the perfect little Chinese kid. That's all I knew, right? But then it was funny because flying back to America, we ended up just staying in Seattle for like a couple of days to hang out with my mom's classmate. And she married an ABC, which is an American-born Chinese. Of course, I'm an ABC too, but he never actually learned Chinese. I mean, he was there for a couple of generations. And it was so funny because, I was trying to talk to him, right? But he couldn't understand me. And I just basically said to my mom, why is this guy so dumb? Why can't he speak Chinese? Which is really funny, right? Obviously, what happened then is, after I got back to Minnesota, I had to start going to school. And, so kindergarten was a transition because obviously I was as, there's this term called FOB. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
No.
Fresh off the boat.
Fresh off the boat. Oh yeah.
Fresh
yes.
The immigrants coming in sort of thing. But I was actually a full-fledged citizen because I was born in Minneapolis. So anyhow, as I got kind of assimilated into the culture there in Minnesota, I had the opportunity to continue speaking Chinese, but I really told my mom, like, hey, we live in America now. We should just speak English because that's what we are Americans now. Okay. So, I kind of regret that. I had no idea, but that's the way it went. And in the meantime, my father, who kept, he did like Bible studies and that sort of thing at the University of Minnesota. And he had a whole fellowship of university students who were Christian. They ended up starting a church, and it's still there today. It's called the Twin Cities Chinese Community Church. So my dad was part of that. So, the Lord had his hand on him. And I guess some of it just kind of spilled over on me as, I'm his firstborn son sort of thing. But to be honest, even though I grew up in the church, it was awkward because, at this Taiwanese, the Chinese church, let's just say it was a little legalistic. Okay.
Yep.
And my mom, she's kind of she's an artist type person, and she's not really good at getting to things on time,
Hmm.
especially like church. And my dad was a deacon, so we would always show up to church late. And I guess one day the story goes is one day the pastor basically just called out my mom and said, "Here's an example of a very poor Christian woman," and
Wow.
that killed her, right? So she
Wow.
basically gave up Christianity on the spot.
Yeah.
She never went back to church.
Wow.
And, even though my dad was a deacon, she forced him to stop going to that Chinese church.
Wow.
So I ended up actually kind of growing up in the United Methodist Church of all places. Okay. Because that
Okay.
was the place just down the street from our house.
Yes.
Um, but I went through the communion. To me, it was just like, it was a club. I didn't really understand the relationship with Jesus. I knew a lot about Jesus because of the training and listening to the sermons and stuff like that, and going to Sunday school. But I was really there more for just hanging out with the guys, and I really enjoyed music when I was young. So they were really good with with singing, and they had a church band, and they had drama and stuff like that. So I really got into that stuff. But as far as a relationship with Christ, it was like, oh, whatever, it's a, if you'd ask me, I would say, yeah, I'm a Christian, because I didn't know anything better. But
Yeah.
what happened was, I went through high school and everything like that, in Minnesota. When I graduated, I actually, didn't get into any school that I wanted to, but I ended up going overseas. So I was called an AFS student. That's an American Field Service. It's an exchange organization where you can actually, spend a whole year in a foreign country with a host family. So I ended up going to Switzerland, and I lived with a Swiss family.
Wow.
I learned how to speak German pretty much there. I did take some summer courses and stuff like that. But when I was in Europe, though, Europe is a very kind of um, uh, man-centered place, right? It's all about the human is the center of
Yes.
of the whole thing. So my whole relationship with Christ, it wasn't there, right?
Yeah.
And all of the things that I enjoyed about church, like um, uh, band, choir, the ping pong club, I actually had all these community clubs available to me. So I got all those needs satisfied without even needing to go to church. And the family I was placed with, they're lovely family, but they're Catholic, and they're like CEOs, right? China, uh, Christmas and Easter only.
Yeah.
So that was the only time we actually went to church, right? Was
Yes.
those times. So I got very comfortable with living without God, without Christ.
Yes.
And when I was in Europe, it just so happens that the dean of admissions is a guy named Fred Hargadon. Um, he actually liked our organization, AFS, and he actually wrote in the newsletter, if anybody wants to come to Stanford, write to me directly. So I took him up on it, So I actually wrote Dean Fred and said, "Hey, Dean Fred, I'm an AFS student. I'm here in Switzerland. I want to come to Stanford." Blah 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 blah. And sure enough, they accepted me. So that's
Wow.
how I got into Stanford, right? And it was
Wow.
cool. It was cool. So I went and everything, and
Was this what's
you know,
how?
that's
Sorry, how was this right out of high school, or was this you're already in college?
no, this is right after high school. So I spent a year in Switzerland as an exchange student
Okay.
between high school and college. Okay.
Okay.
So when I got to college, I was actually a year older than everyone else, obviously, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
then it's funny because when I got into Stanford, um, since it was kind of weird to be a Chinese growing up in Minnesota,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it was actually very strange because even though there was prejudice, all right, it's
Yep.
actually interesting because it was a pro discrimination, because if you were Chinese in Minnesota, it meant that your dad was a doctor or a engineer or well-to-do businessman, right?
Yes.
So they always kind of looked at us like, "Oh, you guys are cool," right? So I never
Yes.
really got anything negative being Chinese in Minnesota. So when I got into Stanford, they had this theme dorm called Okada House, where you could learn what it meant to be an Asian American. Completely new concept to me. So I ended up going to Okada, and I kind of made my lifelong friends as a freshman in that place. And yeah, basically, we're still friends to this day. Although I must say, a lot of them are on the progressive side, so we don't talk too much anymore because we end up always getting in arguments, basically. But
so how was this a dorm, like on
yep,
campus?
it was a dorm. It was an
like
on-campus dorm.
Wow.
Yep, it was a sandwich dorm. It was like guys, and girls in the middle sort of thing.
Okay.
So yeah, but at that point, I was so far from God. I was as heathen as they came. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's funny though, because God's sense of humor, he put me in a group of guys that were all Christians.
Wow.
And they just kind of accepted me for for who I was. But they're my friends, right? So and they're all very, very good Christians and that sort of thing. But I just carried on with my heathen ways, and they just said, "Oh, that's Howell doing what he does." So I went through college, ended up going overseas for a year during college, went back to Germany this time. I worked for Daimler-Benz, the Mercedes-Benz company, as a design engineer, because my focus, even though I started out being a civil engineer, I wanted to be an architect.
Okay.
It turns out Berkeley's architecture program is like one of the top in the world, and Stanford or Berkeley are like, always.
Yes.
And Stanford just basically decided, well, we will never compete with Berkeley with architecture. So they literally canceled the architecture school.
Wow.
I got there, right? So it's like, oh, what do I do now? Because that's what I wanted to be. And they said, well, just get yourself an engineering degree and then go to a real architecture school. That's what they told me. So I started that. But then I found this other major called product design because, I had to take these other courses in other engineering departments. And I had stumbled onto this thing called visual thinking, which was part of the product design program. And I fell in love with that. So that's how I ended up becoming a product designer. Let's see. Long story short, I ended up dating a girl. And again, this is before Christ. We're basically doing whatever guys do with girls, that sort of thing. I graduated and ended up working for one of the top industrial design companies in the whole world, which is actually a funny story too, because it's called Frog Design, FROG Design. It's a German company, Federal Republic of Germany, Frog, right? So when I went to interview, they actually had an office in Campbell, California, which is literally like 20 minutes down the road from Stanford. And when I went in for my my interview, because I had gone to Switzerland and to Germany, I could speak German pretty fluently at that point, but I had a Swiss accent. So if you can imagine, all right, I'm being interviewed by these German guys.
Wow.
Okay, I'm speaking German to them with an Asian face with a Swiss accent. And it just cracked them up. It's like, Howell, say something. And I would say something and they would laugh. So I think they hired me just because I would be like comic relief for them or something like that. So anyhow, so that's how I ended up at Frog Design. So
how long at Frog Design were you there?
I was there for 5 years. For 5 years.
Okay.
And it was a very important 5 years for me, because during that time, that's when I found Christ again. So what happened was, the first couple of years, everything was hunky-dory, except what happened was, because I was actually a year ahead of my girlfriend, she lived with me literally, okay? I bought a house and everything like that because I was, in this job, it paid very well and everything. I was the first guy in my, cadre to actually buy a house, and I had a company car. It was an Alfa Romeo Spider. I mean, I was living the high life, right?
Yeah.
I was living the dream, right? So she would be, at school during the day, and then she would come home to be with me in the evenings, right? So it seemed fine to me and everything was okay. But then after she graduated, she actually said, she confessed to me that during that time, she actually had another guy on campus.
Wow.
So she would be shacking down
at the same time.
At the same time.
Oh,
so
my
I
goodness.
felt there was such a betrayal, right? And
Yeah.
that literally shook my life because, to be honest, at that point, she was my goddess and I worshiped her, right? And
Wow.
to have
Wow.
her betray me, I literally felt like, well, what else is there in the world that I could even trust anymore, right?
Yes. Well,
But that's when.
let me
Go
stop
ahead.
right there real quick. Something came to mind. You said she became your goddess, and I think this is a good point I want to stop at and take a look at, because I think this is well, we see a lot of distractions in the world today, right? There's a
That's
lot
for
of things
sure.
that go on to grab our attention.
Yep.
And why do you think, like, this distraction where we put all of our effort into this one person, and it could take us off of the one thing, maybe graduating, maybe going on pursuing sports and athletics, and you see it a lot of times from like the amateur level to intercollegiate to professional and different sports, but also in the professional level as well, right? Like you've probably seen it a lot where people are chasing girls around, right? Like you put your so tell me a little bit about like what how did that come about, and where was your mindset of like, that's all that I thought about was her. She was my goddess.
Hmm. Well, to be honest, it's because each one of us have a God-shaped vacuum in our souls.
Hmm.
And if we don't have God, we try to fill it with something else
Yes.
because that emptiness is so painful that you got to find something. All right. So the way I filled that void was with girls. All right.
Yes.
So, I mean, just to be honest, right? I was, I chased a lot of girls, and to me, that was part of my, uh, identity, if you will. Okay. And, so for her, she became my goddess because she was the one that filled my void for
Yes.
that time, right?
Okay. Yes.
And then when she left, that's when that void became even more obvious and the emptiness was so real.
Hmm.
But you see, God used this all, he turns all things to good for those that are, called according to his purposes, who love him and are called according to his purposes. At
Yes.
that point, I didn't really love or know him, but he loved me.
Yes.
So he actually kind of set me up for all this because right at that time, when I was going through that loss, basically the first thing I did was I drowned myself in work. So,
Hmm.
now that she was gone, I tried to fill the void with just being successful at work. And I was there like literally uh 20 hours a day, getting projects done. And, my bosses were all super impressed, and that's the reason why I got, promoted so that I could become a design director. I was actually slated to be their general manager for their Taiwan office because they were going to set something up in Taiwan. And that would have been great and stuff like that. But again, God saved me from that because that would have been a disaster
Yeah.
totally.
Yes.
But with that said, what happened was when I was growing up in Minnesota, my mom's sister, older sister, sent her daughter to live with us. So my cousin, her name is Sandy. Okay, she was actually my older sister that I never really had. Right, but no, for all practical purposes, she was my older sister, and I loved her. Because she was my sister.
Yes.
She had gone to college, and then in Minnesota, um, and she became a Christian on campus. So it was really cool. So she ended up getting a job right where I live, like the Bay Area, right? And
Okay.
so she basically said, "Hey, Howell, I really, really want to go to church, but I don't want to go by myself. Would you please go with me?" Now, at that point, I was still pretty anti-God, anti-Christ, all that kind of stuff. But I said, "Well, for you, Sandy, I will go." And so I started going to church with her and stuff like that. And it just so happened that, you know, again, since I was grew up in the United Methodist Church, there's a big United Methodist Church just down the street from where I lived at that time. So it's like, well, let's go check this place out. So me and Sandy went to this place, and for some reason, I really started to feel like God was speaking to me there.
Wow.
So in before, right? The words of the pastor go in here and just out there, right? But
Yes.
this time it's going in here and then kind of going down into my heart.
Hmm.
It's like, this is very strange, and there's this idea of there's this ring of truth about stuff, right?
Yes.
And like all of a sudden it's like, some of this stuff is starting to really make sense. And the fact that this previous girlfriend left me and stuff like that, it's like, okay, well, who can I trust? Well, maybe I can trust God, because
Mm.
maybe he is the only one that's perfect and that will never betray me and that kind of thing. And sure enough, God started to use that. To make a long story short, I ended up in a place where, I mean, music is always, big in the church, but I ended up going to a place called the Vineyard, and the music at the Vineyard touched my heart. I mean, when I would sing the stuff that they were doing, uh, I I couldn't help but just cry, to just feel it, and I just felt the presence of God and the Spirit of God I'd never felt before, and that's when
Wow.
I realized God was real, and
Wow.
so I became born again, and that's when I got baptized. So that was literally Easter of 1980. I want to say that right.
1980.
Yes, yes, it was Easter of 1980.
And how old
And
were you? How old were you, Hal?
I think I was 26, 27, around
26.
that at that point. But then my whole life changed after that, obviously. And then like all the stuff I was doing at Frog Design started to become really kind of meaningless, right? Because I started to realize that, this pursuit of this perfect design, it's never ending. It's an infinite taskmaster, because you always have to do a better design the next time and the next time and the next time. So I was like, I don't know if I can keep this up, right?
Yeah.
So that's when I basically decided that, well, okay, this is what happened. I was asking God, all right, God, what do you want me to do? And he said, well, you can continue on your path at Frog Design, and I will continue to bless you. This is when I was, slated to go to Taiwan and do all that kind of stuff. And then he said, or you can take the road less traveled and join me on this adventure. I was like, well, yeah, let's do the adventure. Now, that sounds like fun. The other thing, I'm not sure, I don't need to do that. So I ended up resigning from my post at Frog Design, right?
Wow. Wow.
And everyone thought I was going crazy, but
Yes.
that's what happened. And it's actually very, very funny, because we had really high end clients. Apple was one of our clients. I actually did a lot of the design for the early Apple stuff.
Yes.
So I could actually point to things and say, yeah, I designed that. Uh, Another big client that we had was Sun Microsystems. I mean, they're nowhere anymore. They got bought out by Oracle or something like that a while back. But back
Yes.
then, they were like the next hot thing, and we were designing, desktops for them and that sort of thing. That was my project. I was in
Yeah.
charge of the whole Sun Microsystems lineup. So I was working with them and stuff. Now, after I left Frog Design, though, I thought to myself, well, I've always wanted to work at a flower shop. And the place where I lived, it was like second floor and third floor were the residential units. I had one of those. On
Yes.
the first floor was a flower shop. So I
Wow.
went in and I applied for a job. They said, okay, well, what can you do? And I was like, well, I can drive. So that's what I ended up doing. I ended up being a driver to drive flowers for deliveries, right? And
Yeah.
it just so happened I actually made a delivery to Sun Microsystems, right? So here I am in the lobby with this, bunch of flowers, and my contact for Sun Microsystems, he's like the vice president of engineering. He walks up and says, Howell, what are you doing? It's like, oh, hey, Clive, I'm delivering flowers now. It's like, what? Why? And,
Gosh.
so I got to kind of share with him, what God was doing in my life and stuff. For what it's worth, I have no idea what happened to Clive. So, anyways, that's what that that was cool. That was cool.
That's
I thought,
cool.
no,
That's
but
neat. And you felt fulfilled at being the flower guy, right?
yeah, I'm the flower guy, right?
You were,
So yeah, eventually though, I ended up getting into graphic design,
okay.
because at that point, if you had a Mac and a laser printer, you could actually start doing graphics. And so
Okay.
I've always enjoyed doing graphics, and I actually had a portfolio, even though I was an industrial designer.
Uh-huh.
And that was enough to actually start my own company. And I, got involved with the Chamber of Commerce and stuff. And, slowly my name got out there, and I started doing lots of work. And yeah, my company, it was called Cactus Design at that point,
Okay.
because I really felt like I was in my spiritual desert time, right?
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool. And then what happened was I ended up getting so successful that it wasn't a desert anymore. It was too prosperous. And the guys that I was with, kind of my men's group, they basically said, yeah, you're growing out of Cactus Design. You're now Envision. So that's how Envision ID came to be. And we were actually one of the top industrial, well, I wouldn't say industrial. We were one of the top identity consulting companies in the Silicon Valley. Because,
Wow.
this is center of Silicon
But
Valley.
are you still
And,
staying at Stanford though, right now? Are you still at Stanford at that time?
oh, no, I'd already graduated.
You
Graduated
graduated.
way,
Oh,
yeah.
okay,
I
you graduated.
graduated Stanford in, I want to say 85, right? So I became
Okay.
born again in 1990. I'm sorry, 1990. I got my decades mixed
Oh,
up. Okay.
1990. Okay,
Yeah,
1990. That makes
1990.
sense.
Yes,
1990.
yes. Okay,
Okay.
that's right.
So that's what I was
Yep,
thinking. I was thinking you got saved in 1980 and then
yep,
19, that's what I was,
yep.
okay. So
Yeah, no.
1990,
Yeah, no, I'm mixing up my decades.
you're
I
good.
knew as I on the decade though. So 1990 is when I
1990.
became born again. Because
Okay.
yeah, I graduated in 85, started working for Frog Design right away, and then I worked for 5 years basically. And then 1990, that's when I got born again, and that's when I resigned from my position at Frog. So from 1990 on, we did the corporate identity thing, you know, and it was really, really good for a while. But then, when the .com bubble burst happened,
Yes.
most of my clients were the .comers. So I ended up basically having to, give up the company because there just wasn't any work coming in anymore. Um, I do see it as a success though, because, the Lord gave me some good advisors, and they
Yes.
said that, it's looking bad. You might want to, start putting on the brakes now. So I did. And so by the time all was said and done, I didn't have any debt. So, I closed down the business, paid everyone their needs to be paid, and I was still whole. So thank God for that.
Great. That's great.
But then at that point, it was like, all right, God, now what? What do you want me to do? And
Yes.
then he said, follow your passions. And so that's like, well, at that point, my passions were worship and tennis. So I
What
was like,
year is
okay,
it? What year is this? They said follow your passion. Like
yeah, this
92?
is yeah, well, let's see. 90, it was like 98, 99
Okay.
in that time frame. Okay. Uh, well, around the 2000 mark, because
Yes.
2000 was supposed to be like the end of the world, right?
Yep.
We
Yep.
were all talking about that. But I experienced the 9/11 catastrophe. I was
Yes.
watching it on TV, and that just really sunk me too. So, but that's when I was really like, okay, God, what do you want? So I ended up, getting certified as a tennis instructor, and then I actually worked for a nonprofit called Malachi 46. Uh, Tennis instructor is pretty straightforward. I ended up, well, I started out in like the satellite parks teaching kids, and I guess I was pretty good at what I was doing, so I eventually got promoted up to be at the main facility, and I ended up becoming in charge of all adult education in our
Great.
municipality. So that was fun. That was good. Um, on the worship side, though, so this ministry, Malachi 4:6, the whole job was to try and get generations of Chinese folk to start talking with each other. Because, the people who come from China and are Christians and they start a church, well, they're going to do their church in Chinese. But all
Right.
their kids are born in America, like me, right? And they're speaking English. So then they always have to kind of branch off and start an English service. But there's always
Did they
kind of
have
like
an
this.
interpreter? Did they have an interpreter to interpret it over to English?
Well, no, what they would do is they'd literally have two services. You know,
Oh,
the old people would go to the Chinese service, the young people would go to the English service, right?
okay. Wow.
So our job was to try and get them to come back together again. You know,
Yes.
Malachi 4:6 is, I'll turn the hearts of the fathers back to their children, and the hearts of the children back to their fathers.
Yes.
What we're trying to do. But in the meantime, right, we were trying to help the English side. And since my thing was worship, I basically taught the English congregations how to start worship teams. So, I just, do kind of philosophy of worship, song selections, where your heart's supposed to be. And then I would actually teach guitar. I played bass as well, so I taught bass guitar, and just how
Where
the
did
whole
you learn?
logistics.
Sorry, where did you
Yeah.
learn these crafts of the guitar? Growing up,
Okay.
like how
So
did you
yeah,
the music end of it?
I started playing guitar when I was in 10th grade.
Dance.
Okay. So I
Okay.
just enjoyed playing guitar anyways, even at Stanford, I played guitar and stuff. Um, but when the Lord really got a hold of me, the thing about the vineyard music, there was a lot of it was guitar led.
Yes.
So, I just pull out the vineyard music, and, when I was working at my own little company, Cactus Design, I'd spend hours just doing worship. I just pull my guitar over, because it's on a stand next to my computer. I would just
Wow.
worship and worship and worship. And that's what taught me the heart of worship, is because
Yeah.
I just did it, right.
Wow.
I learned how to play bass because at that point, before I went to Vineyard, I started going to church at this place called San Jose Chinese Alliance,
Okay.
okay, which is really cool because there's a bunch of Asian Americans like me, and that was cool. I mean, in a way, that was one of the ways that God convinced me that being a Christian was actually cool. You didn't have to be a nerd or a dork or not like to dance, because all my friends, they're cool Asian guys that were all athletic, and they all knew how to dance, and they all knew how to dress and everything like that. It's like, hey, I can hang with these guys, right?
Yes.
And so that really helped me. But the whole thing about going to Vineyard was uh, the Alliance Church was really more. It's called dispensational.
Yes.
I know it's like they had the ideas of there were certain times that certain gifts flowed.
That's right.
Whereas, for me, when I sang the vineyard worship stuff, I knew there's a lot more to this than just what's up in your head, you
Yes.
know. And
Yes.
so I ended up going to Vineyard because of that. But when I was at San Jose Chinese Alliance, guitar players were like a dime a dozen.
Right.
But the guy who was leading worship's like, "Hey, Howell, why don't you learn how to play bass?" I said, "Sure." If that's what we need, then that's what we need. So that's why I picked up the bass and I started playing bass at that point. So yeah.
That is awesome. And then so God's telling you to get back to, the things that you love, the talents.
Yep.
And
So that was it. And so I did that, and it actually
cool.
worked out great for about a year. Unfortunately, the ministry, which was basically paying our mortgage at that time,
Okay.
they lost their funding. So I at that point still couldn't make everything just being a tennis pro, right? I mean,
Yes.
tennis pro was great because it paid for all of our other expenses, but the actual mortgage was being paid by the ministry. So literally at that point, I was like, oh God, now what? And then a week later, my brother calls up, and basically, again, our family has a construction company,
Yes.
and he says, "Hey, our director of business development just quit. How would you like the job?" I was like, "Oh, yeah, that sounds like a great idea." So, and it turned out to be good. I mean, I did have to move our family all the way back to Minnesota, and unfortunately, it was the coldest day of the year in
Oh,
Minnesota
wow.
that we actually moved into our new house. And at that point, I had our son already. He was already like 4, but then my daughter was just born. She's like 4 months old when we actually moved in. And then, that's what happened. But when I was at my father's company, it's called Shaw Lundquist. I basically kind of took over the not only the business development but the marketing as well, because that was my forte, right?
Okay.
Marketing. And
Yeah.
one of the things that happened was we were invited to come to Las Vegas to see if we could do work with the casinos, because they were always looking for a minority company to do construction work, because
Yes.
they have their quotas for minority spend, and construction projects are usually a big money ticket,
Yes.
so they could kind of take care of it like that.
Yes. Yes.
So that's how that happened. And part of my job was to begin that whole process. And so I helped our company begin their found their office here in Las Vegas, which is still here, by the way. My youngest brother now runs it.
Yes.
So,
Okay. Okay.
but in the meantime,
Wow.
what happened was I really felt like my presence at the company was starting to become divisive, because, a lot of the company liked my style of leadership and they wanted to follow me. But then the rest of the company was with my second brother, who's been with the company since he graduated. So I really felt like the right thing to do at that point was to, again, step down from my position at the family company so there'd be no issue about who's in charge.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Did you
so
guys have
that's
different,
what I did.
you guys had different roles at the company?
Yeah, well, he was vice president, because my dad was still alive at that point, and my dad was still president, but he was doing basically all of the executive decisions at that point,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
me as just vice president, I was actually director of marketing and business development still. So I was actually at a lower level, but I was the one that brought in all the new ideas and the exciting things to do and stuff like that, and you know.
So then after that, where did you transition and then leaving your father's company?
So because of that decision, I ended up basically cashing out. And then I felt like the next place that I was supposed to go was Las Vegas. So that's how I ended up in Las Vegas. And that was like 2008 at that point.
2008. Okay.
Yep. And at that time, it seemed to be a really good thing because I was a minority. I was into green building because the green building was like really, really hot at that point. And, everybody knew me in Las Vegas in the construction, thing because, I had been doing all that work. So moving to Las Vegas seemed to be the right thing to do. Unfortunately, if you guys remember in 2008, that's when the real estate bubble burst,
Yeah,
right?
that
And
one.
epicenter was
Real
Las
quick.
Vegas. So
Ah,
all the stuff that I had set up and ready to go meant nothing. Even though they loved my products and loved, what I was doing, they just couldn't because everything stopped.
yeah,
There was just
yeah,
no building whatsoever. So I ended up just, even though I had a bunch of money at that point, I basically had spent it all just keeping the business afloat until, about 3 years in, I was like, yeah, we just can't continue this anymore. So, but God did have a purpose for me being there, being here, I should say, in Las Vegas at that point. But
yeah.
during that time, my father passed away, and that was really, really profound
About
for
the
me.
2010, 8
Yep,
range?
2010. 2010, he
2010.
passed
Okay.
away. Yeah,
Okay.
because I realized at that point that everything that I was doing was to try and impress my dad.
Wow.
Because here this guy, immigrant, came,
Yeah.
to America with nothing, and he built up this multi-million-dollar business. It's
Wow.
like, and I'm his first son, so I need to follow in his footsteps. So
Yeah.
everything I was doing was all about entrepreneurship and trying to be successful like that, so he could be proud of me.
Yeah.
Well,
I love that piece right there. Well, I see it so many, and it's I really relate to that because in my life it was very similar. My dad, his dad, we had this trophy room at our house called, it was the den, right? That we had
uh-huh.
all of our trophies on the wall from my father's, my grandfather's. My friends would come over and see these old black and whites of pictures of my grandfather champion volleyball and tennis, and then as the years gone on, it was like I lived in this bubble of like, how many trophies am I going to get to surpass them in this room? Because it was like, this is what you want to do, and the press clippings in the newspaper, and they had they're still folded and all yellowish and unfolding it. And I was always told that, no one's going to believe you if you don't have your press clippings. Your uncles, my uncle and my dad, they compete against each other, but he never had his press clippings, right? And they'd always, so I'm like, oh my gosh, I better collect all these press clippings. And I know that and I carry those everywhere I'd go, trophies and boxes. And I remember one year my wife just got rid of all of them. It's early on, I'm like, oh my gosh, because every room I'd have, it was built in me, in my DNA. Every room I'd have a trophy room in our homes, and it was like these idols, right? I mean, it's good to have stuff to remember, God talks about, Paul talks about, forgetting what's behind, but pressing on going forward. It's good to glance back. But I do remember that my wife telling me, but I believe so much of what we see as a youth, as a kid through that lens kind of shapes and molds a lot of our worldview as adults. right?
Oh, totally. Totally. Yeah.
It kind of like you were saying, like there was this empty void and you were chasing after girls, and then that void was filled, and now you're chasing after this thing to fulfill your dad's dream, and you're pressing and pressing and pressing. And I think with so many fathers and non-fathers out there, that we see that, we're trying to please someone, and sometimes it's not pleasing the father.
Exactly.
And we're pleasing other people, even if it's our direct family. We still, when
Right.
it's out of there, we're still trying to please other people. And then we get back like, why was I trying to please and catch up with that person? Who is that person? You know what I mean? It could be a close friend. And it wasn't really that person that we had a problem with, or maybe we're competing with, and their rivalries. And where it's sometimes I found with myself, it was a problem with me, that God had to work this out in my heart. And
That's
it
right.
was, and I look back as I'm getting older. I'm sure you see these chapters as you're going, through decades. You forget 80s. Was it the 80s or the 90s? You knew it was on one of these, right?
Right.
But you kind of go back, and it's like, wow, we get to build this this portfolio of things that we got to walk through. I think time under tension, we get to experience, and good, bad, and ugly. But we find ourselves being influenced by the people who are around. They always say you're a product of your own environment, right?
Yep,
You
that's right.
you see this as a kid, and that's all you know, right? You talk that language. By 5 years old, you still didn't know English, right? Because that was the product. You just speaking Chinese. It's like in America.
That's
And
right.
I think we have a huge influence, and others have an influence on us. And I think this thing has a big influence on us, right?
Oh, yeah,
This
it
this
does.
cell, this cell phone right here. I mean,
Much.
we
Too
didn't
much.
have these growing up, but nowadays, man, oh wow. Even
That's
us
right.
in our age
Yep,
plays a big factor.
absolutely.
What do you feel that, like, what is a one thing, going back into like your childhood, and like maybe you graduated from Stanford, and these things that you feel that um, you could have maybe done different, or
Oh, yeah. Well, certainly, I could have had a real relationship with Jesus
okay,
earlier on. That
yes,
would probably be the biggest, profound aspect of things. It wasn't for the lack of, Jesus not trying to reach me. I mean, even on that AFS trip, there were a lot of guys there, real true believers, and they would pray for me and they would talk to me about Christ and everything. Of course, I would just push them away and say, "Yeah, yeah, I know this is I'm confirmed. I did, whatever. I don't need this." Although I did appreciate their care. I did
yes,
appreciate their
okay,
care. I guess that would be the key thing, because if I had a true relationship with Jesus, then I would understand my true identity as a son of God
yes,
rather than the son of my dad, right?
yes,
My
okay,
earthly father. So
yes,
that whole drive to be an entrepreneur and stuff like that would have been much cleaner, you know,
yes,
that sort of thing,
yes,
right?
yes,
Um, I think, well, yeah, certainly. I mean, I do see how all the trials and the suffering that I went through were actually part of what makes me today,
mm,
right? The things that concern me and the things that I have empathy for are
yes,
because of those things that I went through myself, right? And I
yes,
think God uses that, obviously.
oh yeah,
So it's always hard to kind of like put on the glasses, 2020 hindsight. Oh, I should
yes,
have done this, should have done that, yeah. But
yes,
you know, it is what it is. And I, right now, am just very content where I'm at, because kind of like Paul, I've seen good times, I've seen bad times, and through it all, I have Christ. So in the end, I realize now that the thing that's most important to me is Christ. and
Yes,
that's all there is, right? Um,
absolutely.
and right now, I do feel like the people that don't have Christ, they are really to be pitied, because
Mhm.
they're basically trying to fill that emptiness in their hearts with the wrong thing. It will never work. It will always not satisfy in the end,
Yeah.
and they'll just live a life of this just unfulfilled potential, right?
Yes.
But if God is in there, then that actually is the key to releasing everything that
That's right.
God has for you.
That-
So, you know, for
Yeah.
anybody who's listening that doesn't know Christ, got to do it.
Yeah. You make a key point, because look, you can work for a Fortune 500 company, drive an Aston Martin, live in Palo Alto, go to Stanford, live in the dorms, be in Silicon Valley, the .com era. Yeah, all these things, right? And just like you said, Paul talked about, like, all that was like rubbish, what he said, compared to living for Christ. And I think
That's
that
right.
was exactly right, because how many people are chasing after even other people's dreams, or dreams that are on here, and I can get caught in it. We can all get caught into it, and we can
That's
all
right.
see the lives that other people live that's not real. It's just fantasy living, right? That's
Mhm.
posted
Mhm.
here. But how can you live out the same life you're posting here when someone's in front of you 24/7? Does it match up with what you post and pictures? Is that what people think of you when they're with you? And I
Right.
think that's it's missing, and it's harder, I think, because we have that phone and the social media than we had before. But
Mhm.
I think it's even more why us as men need Christ. Us as men being leaders of our homes, our family, our kids, that we need to be. I've gone through so many self-help books and courses, and my wife used to laugh of how many things we could have probably sold and made a garage sale just filled of just courses, right? and I feel the same way, that I don't feel it's a waste. We learn every step of the way through whatever, good, bad, and ugly. Um, but at the same time, our coach and our leader is Jesus Christ. And if we have
That's
him
right.
ahead of all those courses, then yeah, we can fit these courses in if it fits in with what God wants you to do. But if it's out of his will, we're going to strive and try to fulfill that void, like you said, that empty hole, and keep pushing. We can push hard, but man, we're going to burn. We're going to burn out and burn that candle, right? And
That's
and
right.
and I love what you said of being content, and it's hard to get to that spot because of our fast Western crazy life here, where we have so much that we're so ungrateful for, right? we got
Yep.
we got homes, we got cars, we got food. We are rich, comparable to the rest of the world. We're like a little glimpse of the rest of the world, right? United States. But men now, growing up, wanting to be the leaders, what do you feel is lacking? I know Christ is lacking in this world as men. What
Mhm.
else would you say is lacking in the men today, um, as we go through into this next season of life?
Absolutely. Well, to me, I mean, the way God created us is that we learn by imitating,
Okay.
right? Like when kids learn a language, or if they learn to they're watching others, right?
Yes. Yes.
So what we need are good models of what
Okay.
it means to be a Christian man,
Okay.
because we just don't have those very much anymore.
That's right.
We have lots of models of what it means to be wealthy and be, you know, successful in the world, but they're not good role models. They really
Yes.
aren't.
Yes.
So I think that's what we need is good role models and mentors.
Yes.
People that will come alongside younger Christian men, young men, even older men. you know, young in the
Yeah,
faith, let's say young in the faith, right?
yeah,
And help them,
yes.
look at it. Okay, well, instead of like telling them what to do, you say, well, what do you think is the righteous thing to do in this,
Mm,
given the principles that we're taught, you know,
yes.
how do you actually live it out? So,
How do
yes,
you live it out? Yeah, how do you live it out? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we look at our if I always look at if we looked at our day every single day, and we're like you're in your car right now, and and Jesus is in that passenger seat, would he be pleased with everything that goes on, what you listen to, what your thoughts are, how you react to cars around you, how you talk on the phone, and not everyone can say it's a-okay. I mean, we're all sinners and we know that we don't measure up everything, but when you look through the lens as, you know, is it pleasing? Are we living this life that is measured through a measuring stick of what we can come back to? We can come back to God's word, right? It's
right.
there's got to be some kind of regulation. There's got to be some kind of a measuring point. You can't just say, "Oh, this is kind of good for now." This is what I'm not hurting nobody. And you just have this
That's
kind
right.
of thing out there that you're living up to, but the standard of living, right? I always say that there was a guy growing up in junior high, and a big thing when we were growing up playing basketball was dunking the basketball, right? You'd first try to dunk it with a tennis ball, and then a volleyball, and then a women's basketball, and then a men's basketball, right? Because depending on the size of your hand, you may not be able to grip it. But he's like, my friend of mine goes, "Man, I can dunk the basketball now. Come watch me dunk." Okay, you couldn't dunk a couple weeks ago. Now all of a sudden you can dunk. So we go and watch him dunk. Well, he's dunking on an 8-foot rim,
Uh,
right? Regulations 10 feet. So
right.
anyone can lower the standard in life and live up to that standard. But if you
Hmm.
if you if you have the true regulation of what to live by, it's tough. And as you try to measure up, you may fall short all the time, but it's okay as long as you have the standard. You're not trying to lower the standard in life to meet
Hmm.
your goodwill of you looking good.
Absolutely.
And I
Yep.
think so many times people are lowering the standard for them to look okay.
Yep.
And I think you're right with young men, people that are growing up in this age. They don't have role models to really look at, to see people going through tough times, adversity, because everyone could be as happy and excited when things are going well. Right? Everyone's joyful, but you can really
Right.
see the real joy and character of someone through pain.
Mhm.
And just follow, like you said, you just follow and watch them. You don't have to, you know um listen to what they say. It's what they do.
Hmm.
And I think
Exactly.
you're exactly right. And we have a lot of great role models in our country that in history books that have been trying to be erased. That, wow, a lot of adversity to even find our country, right? That we have these. I love documentaries and life stories on people, right? Because you can see the adversity and what the underdog. I love that. Those stories of underdogs, right?
Mhm. Yep.
Sports and Christianity. If it's sports, Christianity, and a documentary, or a true story, sorry, it's my kind of story, right? I love that.
Hmm. Yep.
And I think we miss that. We think it's far-fetched, or people look at the Bible that it's just these these stories. Like, these are real events that happen, and it's happening right now with us. There's
Hmm.
miracles all the time going on with, and we just are blind-eyed to a lot of this stuff in life. And I think
That's right.
I love relating this to fitness because, I always say that, if we don't touch it, see it, feel it like yesterday, then we give up on it, right? We
Right.
stop. We go, "Oh my gosh, this doesn't work. I'm done." Um, I want to go in real quick about your fitness journey. This is a new journey for you, right?
Yes, it is.
Share a little bit about that. I know you shared about, you went into the tennis world, and now you got this fitness journey that you're kind of experienced. We talked a little bit about family, your faith, which is awesome. And then fitness is a new thing for you.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, as I didn't get to finish off the last part of my life journey, long story short is when I got back to the Bay Area after my father died,
Yes.
I realized that my wife's father was about the same age, and he was still back in the Bay Area. So we were really feeling like it's time for us to, get out of Las Vegas and move back to California. And
Okay.
luckily, we never sold our place, so it was still there. So we, put out a couple of lamb's wools, for God to speak, and sure enough, He said go. So we went back. At that point, even though I started out getting into tennis and doing that, I mean, to be honest, I was probably in the best shape of my life at that time. I was doing a keto diet, and just because of the nature of my work, I was on the court doing drills, running around, sparring with my students and everything like that. But what happened was I ended up getting into teaching.
Yes.
Um, there was this place just down the street from where I lived that was a Christian academy. It was one of the top Christian academies in California. And
Wow.
I actually helped them start their first tennis team. So I
Wow.
knew about them and I knew about their culture. And it was just such a dream to me because, as the director of tennis for a municipality, I was literally forbidden to talk about my faith. And that
Wow.
just like, oh, this is too painful, right? So I basically said, well, God, if you ever make a way for me to get on staff at this Christian academy, I'm gonna go. And sure enough, He did. He opened a door, and I ended up going in as a math teacher, and I, taught math for a couple of years there, and it was awesome that I was in heaven. However, getting to be a teacher instead of a tennis instructor, I became very sedimentary.
Mm.
And, obviously, teachers' lounges are always filled with yummy donuts and, stuff from Panera and stuff. So, what can I say? And when the Lord transitioned us back to Las Vegas, I ended up continuing with, teaching at Christian academies. And so basically, I just got more and more, less physical exercise and all that. And then at the last couple of years, that's when I really got into full-time ministry stuff. And for sure then, and I was like, what diet, what exercise, I mean, literally, before you and I started playing pickleball, I
Yes.
hadn't really touched the paddle in years, right? So, so I really felt like though, since this is the year where we have to be warriors, we have to be, God's army and prepared for anything. Fitness is one of those things that we really need. So
Yeah.
I was really convicted, and the fact that the Lord put us together that one night, I really believe that was God's sign for me to say, "Yep, you got to get yourself back in shape." So that's where I'm at right now, and
That's
I got to say I'm very happy. Because I started out on this program like at 205 pounds or something like that, and
yes.
just this morning I was like 195.
Wow.
So
Wow.
praise God.
Praise
Yeah.
God.
So
Yes.
that's working, and I know I'm still lacking in my in my foundation of the actually nutrition stuff, but to be honest, because keto was so successful for me back then, I kind of fell back into the keto mode of things, and it seems to be working for me okay for now. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
obviously, we'll see how that goes.
Yes.
But it's been more than just a physical journey. It has been a spiritual journey because
Yes.
a lot of these mornings, because I have to get up at basically 5:30 to make the 6 o'clock class. Oh man, sometimes I do not want to get out of bed.
Oh man.
Yeah, like
Yes.
especially this morning, it was all raining and
Oh.
cold and stuff. And I was like, oh, do I really want to go?
And
So
and then we have a packed house. You're going, where are all these other people coming from, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. So, but things like the cold plunge stuff, I never thought I'd do it, but now I'm up to like 5 minutes cold
Wow.
shower. It's like I didn't think I could do that, and every time I think about going to do it, it's like, oh, you know, but that's the discipline, right?
Yes.
And to me, it is such
Yes.
a beautiful message because, we were talking earlier about living the righteous life. Well,
Mm.
the word for that is sanctification,
Yes.
right? I
Yes.
mean,
Hmm.
Christian life, there's two things: there's justification and sanctification.
Yes.
Justification is what happened when Jesus died on the cross, and we received his blood. The blood covers us and makes us whole. So we are
Yes.
justified in being in the presence of God. However, you can't just stop there. You
Mhm.
also need the sanctification, which is now to work out your justification in actually becoming Christ, becoming uh, all the things that God wants you to be because he created you for a specific purpose. He knew you, he knit you in the womb,
Yes.
which is another reason why we are pro-life, because God, every little being that's in the womb, God knows,
That's right.
and he mourns for everyone that's killed. It's
Amen.
just, yeah, powerful.
Amen.
So,
Amen.
anyways, so yes.
That is
So
great. That is awesome. Yeah. And you have yeah, you're right. Getting up in the morning and getting ready. But it's so much easier doing with people, right?
absolutely.
Like you said,
Absolutely.
the spiritual parallel right there. This Christian journey, it can't happen solo by yourself.
Exactly.
We need each other in locking arms. Like iron sharpens iron, and the Bible talks about this of us, the brotherhood, right? And walking together and confessing our sins together and the group that we're starting to SWAT, right? Sinners
Hmm.
with a testimony starting up on Wednesdays. And I'm excited about that and just deep diving in and building because you're right. Being a warrior for Christ, spiritually, yeah, we need to be spiritually equipped, but we physically have to be ready for anything. Always
Right.
be ready, and because you just don't know. And what's the worst can happen? You become the best version of yourself, right? And you get in good shape for the right purpose for Him, not for selfish gratification. And I think when your why is so much bigger than just, hey, I want to look good. There's a it starts to become part of your lifestyle. That's the discipline. That's the discipline when we wake up every single morning going, oh my gosh, I've got to do this again. But we do that. We train our mind because
Yeah.
it's a crazy place up there, right? Don't be conformed
Right.
to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of the mind. It takes time to renew that crazy mind. Mine's a dangerous spot up here, man. If I'm by myself, I need people to enter in there with me, especially the Lord, right?
Hmm.
It's a dangerous spot. So um, I think it's a dangerous spot for all men today without Christ, and those who have Christ, it's still dangerous because if you're not, like you said, not living it out and not practicing and walking in the truth, just checking the box and going to church, that's not going to do it either. Not in this day, because
Exactly.
you're gonna get sifted out. You got to choose one side or the other and how you're going to walk. And if you don't know what His Word says, you're going to be swayed by any little thing that looks shiny and looks good one day.
Hmm.
One day you're going to sway over here and you just don't know because you're going off of what people, you're becoming a man pleaser, not a God pleaser. And so
Exactly.
we've all been there and we've all been through those roads. But I think God has brought us through this time for a special time for us to be warriors and leaders and being able to lead men in the right way, like you said, not just financial or success in the world of education, but spiritually being equipped with the right weapons to this crazy warfare that we're heading into. And so praise God that we have the opportunity to do this. Praise God that we have an opportunity to make to become good mentors to those mentees that God allows us to pour into, and at the same time during the journey, we get these little kisses on the forehead. I always say that God is just like good, faithful servant, right? Just keep doing. Don't grow weary of doing good. Just keep doing it and keep doing it because it's pleasing him. We don't have to look at the eyeballs or how to please our father, earthly father, right? And the trophy rooms or how to be successful in the Fortune 500 companies and all this. So Hal,
Sure.
I think, man, that was awesome. Thank you for jumping on.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity.
With us. I'm excited about us continuing this journey and seeing what God has us on spiritually, where he has us moving into 2024 and the physical venture and the pickleball venture and all these other ventures. There's a lot of cool stuff, and super excited that we've got to get on here, and a lot I've learned. I didn't know a lot about your story, so that is super awesome. All right, cool. Guys. Well, that is the Uncommon Human, Dr. Howell Shaw. Thank you guys for tuning in, and God bless.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, comment, subscribe, and share this video as much as possible. And visit our exclusive Facebook community where Derek offers training videos and other